Alright, there's been a lot of connections between the 3 games and 6 DLCs of Dark Souls, but I've always wondered about the connections between their standalone titles and the Souls trilogy. One part that really stood out was that Miyazaki has foreshadowed his next games within his previous titles. Most of you are well aware of Marvelous Chester, who stands out with his Victorian-style clothing. And he should feel familiar since his attire is basically the hunter's set, with top hat and all. And I mean, he even mentions how he's not from this land. But my favorite part is, if you aggro him, you actually never see him roll, and his only way of dodging seems to be this awkward backstep, which could be the prototype to the Bloodborne quicksteps. The other foreshadowing takes place after the Ludwig fight, where you'll come across Yamamura, who stands out with his Eastern-style clothing. And although it might not be that obvious in-game, the concept art really hits the mark, and this style of design looks like a character out of Sekiro, and could possibly be the startings of the game. But there's one connection that we all love to hate, and Patches has shown up in every game since Demon's Souls. I mean, even in Bloodborne he makes his return as probably the grossest NPC. But for Sekiro, there seems to be nothing. Although there is one likely option, and Anayama the Peddler has more than just a few similar traits. When we first meet him in the Hirata estate, he mentions of a 3-story pagoda where some kind of treasure is kept. And intentional or not, this is a trap, as guarding the treasure is that relentless purple ninja that I could just not beat. But that's just scratching the surface, and we can see him wearing an eye patch as well as a coat full of patches. And just to top it off, he is also balding. But one of these connections goes back the other way, and Bloodborne has a specific item that makes fun of the Dark Souls series. You'll come across a shield, which is basically useless, and the item description mentions how shields are nice, but not if they engender passivity. And this pokes fun at the slower tempo of the previous Souls games, which in comparison do fall short of Bloodborne. And there's actually a Bloodborne boss that has a major connection to Demon's Souls. After being killed by Gascoigne, he used to mutter the phrase Umbasa. And this detail was brought to light by Lance McDonald, so check him out. But if you've played Demon's Souls, Umbasa is a very popular expression, although it was cut out of the game, so it was likely too on the mark. Another connection lies between the Tower of Latria heart and the Brain of Mensis. Both these amalgamations of flesh are slowly being released from their chains, with the only difference being one falling into the void and the other splatting. But the Tower of Latria heavily inspired the Upper Cathedral Ward as well as their Nightmare brain suckers. Besides their designs being similar, the way they're set up is pretty much identical. They're both placed in these thin hallways that limit your mobility, so they can stun you with their long-range attack and then go in for the kiss. But as I mentioned earlier with the Latria heart, there's another cutscene that's a little too similar. And the intro cutscene for the dancer and One Reborn both kind of leak fluid and then emerge from this void of doom. But it seems that if Miyazaki likes something, he'll just do it again, which I have no issue with. And we see this again with Logarius' sword knife thing, which looks similar to the Soulbrands, a blade from Demon's Souls. Although that's nothing when you compare it to the Drake sword from Dark Souls 1, which shares a similar color as well as overall design. I mean, even this line through the middle is nearly identical. Now, DS3 has subtly brought back Bloodborne's main mechanic through an item, and the ring Pontiff's Left Eye replenishes your health after you start attacking, which, just like Bloodborne, promotes you to become even more aggressive instead of retreating and using a heal. Also, the item description does mention of people being transformed into frenzied beasts, which is basically every Bloodborne boss. But Sekiro has a very Bloodborne-esque area, which is the Mibu village. Within the area, you'll come across these slugs, which litter the ground, and we see these same creatures around the fishing hamlet. So I wonder what the massive lore implications are, which is probably nothing since they're just a reused asset. Now, oddly enough, there's another Victorian-style character that stands out in a medieval-style world, and many have come across Ringfinger Leonard and his Bloodborne-esque clothes, which in comparison looks a lot like the Yharnam Hunter set. And while researching, it was pointed out by user ToxyToxy that each of Rosaria's members correspond to a previous Souls game. Yellowfinger Hazel wears the Xanthus crown, which is referencing the old monk, Longfinger Kirk originated from Dark Souls 1 as Kirk Knight of Thorns, Kraden the Wanderer, who's from DS2, you battle as an invader on the Irithyll Bridge, Leonard as Bloodborne, and if you join the Rosaria Covenant, you, your own character, would represent Dark Souls 3. And I thought it was a coincidence at first, but from Kraden to Leonard, it does seem very intentional. Now, there's no way I could not mention the Moonlight Greatsword, as it reoccurs in almost every single Souls game. But once again, Sekiro lets us down, and there seems to be no sword that resembles the Moonlight Greatsword. Although some do consider the Divine Dragon's weapon, as they both share that beautiful greenish-blue glow as well as a similar ranged attack, but that's the best there is. Although there are some repeating designs that you don't really notice until you start to compare, and one that sticks out, I guess literally, are the massive pillars seen throughout the games. The surrounding area of the Hunter's Dream has the stone pillars, the outside of Aldia's Keep displays the more natural rock pillars, and DS1 and DS3 have the giant trees of Ash Lake and Smoldering Lake, which aren't pillars but stylistically are the same. I also do want to mention the almost elegant final boss arenas that take place in these gorgeous flower fields. The final fights of Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3, and Sekiro are just as pretty as brutal, and if the Valkyrie turns out to be the final boss, then Elden Ring is no exception, as we can see these flowers covering the ground. But for a video that I didn't think had enough content, I was pleasantly surprised by the amount of connections for these games. But as always, if I missed any details or got anything wrong, I'd love to know, and I appreciate you watching up until this point. Have a good one.